It started like any ordinary morning in the quiet halls of Willow Creek High School. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where routines ran like clockwork, and where being different stood out like a red light in traffic. Was the middle of the semester, just cold enough for students to drag their hoodies tighter around themselves, and just quiet enough for whispers to travel far. But this morning wasn't ordinary for one person. Jasmine had just moved into town. A week ago. She was the new girl. The kind of new that still wore the wrong shoes, still sat in the wrong cafeteria seat, and still hadn't figured out which hallway was for freshmen and which one you avoided if you didn't want trouble. She kept her head low, her books tight, to her chest, and her steps soft like she hoped not to be noticed. Her hair was long, dark, thick, and braided neatly by her mother every morning before she left for her new job. It was something Jasmine carried with pride, something that reminded her of home when everything else felt unfamiliar. But some people noticed her anyway, and not in the way anyone would want. 3 girls, Sierra, Michaela, and Lauren, had ruled the junior hallway for as long as anyone could remember. Pretty, popular, and bored, they were the type who didn't need a reason to mess with someone. Jasmine's quiet confidence and unfamiliar face made her an easy target. They whispered when she passed, giggled when she stumbled, and rolled their eyes any time she raised her hand in class. But Jasmine never reacted. She kept her composure, never once giving them the satisfaction of seeing her crack dot until that day in 4th period dot. It was English class. Ms. Hollingsworth was giving a lecture on symbolism in literature. The room buzzed quietly as students flipped pages and half listened. Jasmine was seated in the 2nd row, scribbling notes, when she felt it soft at first, like something brushing her back. She turned, but no one looked at her. Then she felt it again, a sharper tug this time. Before she could fully turn around, there was a sudden snip, a sound that didn't belong in a classroom, followed by a gasp from someone nearby. The room went still. Jasmine reached behind her in disbelief. A thick braid, once full and carefully coiled, now hung uneven, chopped in the middle. A piece of it lay on the floor next to her desk. The laughter started low from Michaela, then Lauren. Then Sierra chimed in with a loud, mocking giggle. She needed a makeover anyway, one of them said. Jasmine froze. Her hand trembled as she touched the ruined braid. Her eyes didn't water, but her jaw clenched so tightly it looked like it hurt. The teacher didn't even notice. No one stood up for her. The class stayed silent. And Jasmine, without saying a word, picked up the severed piece of her hair, calmly packed her bag, and walked out. She didn't return that day. Not to that class. Not to school. Rumors flew by lunchtime. She cried in the bathroom. No, she went straight to the principal. I heard her mom came and screamed at the office. But none of that was true, because Jasmine didn't cry. She didn't complain. And her mother didn't even know, but someone else did. His name was Elijah, a quiet black teen who sat in the back row of that class. Tall, lanky, always scribbling in his notebook. Most students ignored him too, assuming he was shy or just didn't want to get involved. But Elijah saw everything. He saw the way Jasmine held herself even when her hair was on the floor. He saw how the class looked away. And he saw something else, too, something that made his stomach twist. Later that day, on his way home, Elijah took the long route. Not because he was scared, but because he had something on his mind. He'd once given up his bus seat to a pregnant white woman when no one else would budge. It wasn't a big deal to him, just a simple act. But she'd handed him a note before. She got off. A note that would later lead to a scholarship, a mentorship, and a future that none of his teachers had thought possible for a kid like him. That moment changed his life. And now he felt that same weight. The kind where you know silence means agreement. And doing nothing is worse than doing something wrong. The next morning, Jasmine came back to school, but she looked different. Her long braids were gone. Her hair now cut short, shaped into a clean, confident style. Her walk had changed to still quiet, but not small. She wore it like armor now. And Elijah? He sat waiting, because he'd written something he needed her to read. Not in a note like the one he once got, but in something bigger. By the afternoon, whispers turned into murmurs. Sierra, Michaela, and Lauren were called to the principal's office. One by one. No one knew what happened in that room. But when they came out, they didn't laugh. And by the end of the week, the entire school was talking. Because something had changed. Something Jasmine had done. Something Elijah had started. And what happened next no one could have seen coming. It wasn't just about hair anymore. It was about justice. About courage. About standing when others sit. And finding power in silence before turning it into action. But this was just the beginning. Because by the time the district got involved, and parents started calling, and the media started showing up, it wasn't just Willow Creek High on the line. It was the entire town. And the girl whose hair had been cut, she wasn't just another victim anymore. She had become the storm. It wasn't long before Jasmine's name started traveling through the hallways like smoke. Soft at first, then thick and inescapable. People started whispering, not because she was the new girl anymore, but because something had shifted. Some said she was the reason the principal canceled the next school assembly. Others swore she had a lawyer in her family. And a few even claimed she'd recorded the whole thing, that humiliating moment in class, and sent it somewhere important. But Jasmine hadn't said a single word. She moved through the halls with the same steady steps. She didn't glance at the girls who had wronged her. She didn't flinch when people stared. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was loud in its own way. Even teachers, once distant, started greeting her differently. Like they weren't sure whether to show sympathy or keep their distance. Elijah noticed it all. Every quiet glance, every awkward pause. But what no one knew was what had really set everything in motion. It wasn't just Jasmine's decision to return with her head held high. It was the words Elijah had written. He'd spent that night after the incident writing a full report, but not to the principal, not just yet. He wrote it to the school board, typed, printed, and signed it. He included details about what he saw, how the class reacted, how the teacher failed to intervene. He even quoted students who sat nearby. It wasn't angry. It was detailed, calm, but powerful. And with it, he attached something even more serious, a letter from someone very unexpected. The woman he had once helped on the bus. She wasn't just any passenger. Her name was Susan Whitaker, a former education rights attorney, now working with a national nonprofit that helped students facing discrimination and bullying. The note she had given Elijah a year ago had led to a conversation, then mentorship, and eventually a direct connection. She believed in giving kids like Elijah the tools to change the system from the inside. So when he emailed her, telling her what had happened to Jasmine, she didn't hesitate. She reached out to the district. And now things were moving fast. Inside the school, however, no one knew the real reason behind the sudden investigations. There were murmurs of school board visits, of certain staff being reviewed, but no one had all the pieces. Not even Jasmine. She didn't know Elijah was behind it all. Not yet. Meanwhile, Sierra, Michaela, and Lauren were slowly realizing things weren't going to blow over. Their parents had been called. There were meetings after school. The principal no longer smiled when he saw them in the halls. And other students, once quick to laugh along with them, were suddenly avoiding eye contact. The power they once flaunted so easily had vanished like fog under sunlight. Michaela tried to play it off at first, joking about how everyone's too sensitive now. but even her voice lacked the confidence it once carried. Lauren started skipping class. Sierra stayed quiet most days, her fake confidence cracking at the edges. And yet, Jasmine didn't lash out. She didn't retaliate. But that didn't mean she wasn't doing anything. What most didn't see was the notebook she now carried in her bag. It wasn't for class notes. It was something else. Inside were pages filled with her thoughts, her fears, her anger, but also her plans. Jasmine wasn't just trying to survive high school anymore. She was figuring out how to make sure no other girl ever had to feel like she did that day. That's when she and Elijah finally spoke. It was after school, in the library. The place was nearly empty, except for a few students scrolling through their phones. Elijah had been sitting in the corner, sketching in his journal. Jasmine walked past him at first, not noticing. But then she paused. Something told her to turn around. "You were in the class," she said softly. He nodded. "You saw what happened?" He closed the notebook and looked up. "Yeah, I saw everything." There was a long silence between them. Jasmine sat down across from him. "Why didn't you say anything?" "I wasn't ready," he admitted, "but I did write something." She looked at him, unsure. "I sent it," he said, "to someone who could help." Jasmine's eyes narrowed slightly. "Help how?" "She's part of an organization that works on school bullying cases. They're already talking to the district. That's why everything's changing." Her breath caught. "You did that?" He nodded again. "Why?" He paused for a moment, then said, "Because once someone helped me. A stranger. Changed my life. And I figured maybe it was my turn." She didn't speak for a while, just stared at him with something like gratitude, but deeper. Something that said she hadn't expected anyone to care, but not everything was hopeful. The school board's involvement made some teachers nervous. A few started treating Jasmine like a problem instead of a victim. The assistant principal even pulled her into the office under the excuse of checking on her well-being. But most of the questions felt more like interrogation. Did you provoke them? Were you involved in anything before that day? Do you feel safe coming to school? Jasmine answered calmly, but she could see what they were doing, trying to find a crack in her story. Something to shift the blame. But there were no cracks. The tension at Willow Creek High was growing. Parents had started asking questions. One mother, overheard during pickup, said loudly, "If they're punishing girls for just playing around, what's next? You can't even breathe in school anymore." But not everyone felt that way. A group of students had quietly started showing support for Jasmine. A few began wearing purple hair ties, her favorite color. Others started eating lunch near her table, not crowding her, just being there. Still, no one knew what the final fallout would be. Not yet, because just as things started to settle, just as the story seemed to be losing its momentum, something happened. Video surfaced, and it wasn't from the school's security cameras. It was from the student's phone. It showed the exact moment Sierra had cut Jasmine's braid. The laughter, the silence, the expression on Jasmine's face as she picked up the piece of her hair. All of it unfiltered, unedited. And someone leaked it online. Within hours. It spread through the school like wildfire. Then the town. Then beyond. Suddenly, the story wasn't just about Willow Creek High anymore. It had become something bigger. Something no one was ready for. And Jasmine? She wasn't backing down. Not anymore. The video changed everything. By the next morning, students were glued to their phones, huddled in corners, whispering and watching the footage on repeat. Teachers tried to control the chatter, but it was like trying to hold water with bare hands. The video had gone far beyond the walls of the school, shared on community Facebook pages, tweeted by youth advocates, and even picked up by a local blog under the headline, "Teen Girl's Hair Cut by Classmates. No One Helped." In the middle of the storm stood Jasmine, the girl everyone was talking about, but few truly knew. She walked through the halls that day with more stares than ever, but they were different now. They weren't mocking or amused. They were cautious, curious. Some were even apologetic. But Jasmine didn't say much. She kept moving. Her eyes stayed focused, like she'd already made peace with being seen, for better or worse. Sierra, Michaela, and Lauren, however, were nowhere to be found. Word spread quickly that they'd been pulled from class for safety reasons. One of them had allegedly received threats online. The administration tried to make it seem like a responsible decision, but to many students, it felt like avoidance. Like the system was protecting the ones who caused harm. Again, and the tension only got thicker. Elijah watched it all unfold from the sidelines. He had never meant for it to blow up like this. He just wanted accountability, not chaos. But now, the school was divided. Some students supported Jasmine fully, even holding a silent walkout during lunch with handmade signs that read things like, "Respect our hair," and "Silence is complicity." Others muttered that it had gone too far, that it was just a joke, and everyone's too sensitive now. The conflict wasn't just about hair anymore. It was about race, about bullying, about power, and about how schools handle or fail to handle moments like this. What many didn't see was what was happening behind closed doors. Jasmine's mother, Mrs. Bennett, had requested a formal meeting with the school board. She brought printed screenshots, a copy of the video, and a composed but firm voice that didn't waver. "I send my daughter here to learn, not to survive," she said. "If you can't protect her, then we need to talk about why." One of the board members, woman named Ms. Patel, leaned in during the meeting. She looked at Jasmine carefully and said, "Do you want to press charges?" The room went silent. Jasmine's fingers gripped the edge of her chair. It wasn't something she'd considered. She hadn't even spoken much since the incident. But now, the weight of that question hung in the air. Elijah, meanwhile, had his own battle brewing. Some students had started calling him a snitch. A few boys in gym class shoved past him harder than usual. One of them hissed under his breath, "We don't like rats." He tried to ignore it, but it started getting to him. He didn't regret speaking up, but the fallout was heavier than he'd expected. Still, he kept in contact with Ms. Whitaker, the woman who had helped him before. She advised him to document everything: names, dates, times. "Stay smart," she said. "The truth always makes people uncomfortable before it sets anything right." One afternoon, as he sat under the bleachers after school, Jasmine found him again. "I heard people are giving you a hard time," she said. He didn't look up. "Nothing I can't handle." She sat beside him quietly. "You didn't have to do what you did, you know." "I did," he replied. "I just didn't think it would explode like this." "Me neither." They sat in silence for a few moments. Not awkward, just thoughtful, like they both understood something without having to say it. Then Jasmine said, "I haven't told anyone this, but I still don't know what I'm supposed to do. Part of me wants them to feel everything I felt, and another part just wants to be left alone." "That's not weakness," Elijah said. "That's being human." But outside of their quiet conversation, the situation kept evolving. Local media had started showing up at the school gates. Reporters tried to interview students, asking loaded questions like, "Do you think the school is failing students of color?" And "Have you ever witnessed bullying here before?" The administration, clearly overwhelmed, tried to keep things contained. They issued a formal statement calling the incident deeply unfortunate and promised a thorough investigation. But most students saw through it. It was vague, careful, the kind of language used to protect reputations, not people. Meanwhile, subplots began to emerge. One teacher, Mr. Dawson, was quietly removed from classroom duties. Rumors said he'd been warned before about ignoring bullying. Complaints, and this case might have been the last straw. Another twist came when a student anonymously leaked text messages from Sierra's group chat, where the three girls bragged about giving that girl a new look and called her names that turned even some of their closest friends against them. That leak did more damage than the video itself. Students who had once laughed along with Sierra were now distancing themselves. A few even apologized to Jasmine in the hallway. She accepted their words, but not their friendship. Not yet. And through it all, Elijah kept writing. His notebook, once filled with sketches and quiet thoughts, now held a full timeline, statements from students who had witnessed the bullying but had been afraid to speak. He wasn't doing it for attention. He was building something he couldn't quite explain yet, but he wasn't alone anymore. A small group of students began meeting after school in the art room. They called themselves the Quiet Room, not because they didn't speak, but because they listened. It was a place for students like Jasmine, like Elijah, and others who had felt invisible, who had been pushed aside. Their mission was simple: tell the truth and help others do the same. But not everyone liked the change. Whispers of retaliation began to surface. Someone left an anonymous note in Jasmine's locker. "You should have stayed quiet." Another student, who had shared their bullying story at a quiet room meeting, found their tires slashed in the parking lot. The tension was no longer under the surface. It was alive, present, and ready to explode. And through it all, Jasmine kept walking forward. She didn't flinch. Not outwardly, but inside. The storm was building. She knew the worst hadn't come yet, but she also knew this time she wouldn't be alone when it did. The next few days at school felt heavier than ever. Every hallway was filled with whispers, and every glance held a question. Jasmine didn't stop coming to school, but the tiredness in her eyes said more than words ever could. It was the kind of exhaustion that comes not from fear, but from fighting. Fighting for truth in a place that had long ignored it. Elijah could see it. He knew she wasn't just standing up to Sierra and Michaela anymore. She was standing against a system that had allowed them to believe they could get away with it. The quiet room wasn't just a safe space anymore. It had become a movement. More students began showing up. Some came forward with their own stories, about bullying, about silence, about how they too had once felt invisible. Jasmine's courage had unlocked something in others. People weren't just supporting her to look good anymore. They genuinely saw themselves in her. Jasmine's parents stepped up as well. Her mother, calm but fierce, spoke at a local press conference. "Our kids don't go to school to have their spirit cut down," she said. "They go to chase their dreams. And if someone tries to take that away, or if they're made to feel small, we as parents have a duty to stand up." Everyone held their breath the day the school board made its final decision. Sierra, Michaela, and Lauren were officially suspended. They were also required to complete community service and go through restorative education sessions on racial sensitivity and bullying. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't justice in full, but it was something that never would have happened if Jasmine had stayed silent. Something that never would have begun if Elijah hadn't spoken up first. But the moment that stayed with everyone came after. Standing in front of reporters, surrounded by students and teachers, Jasmine spoke. "I don't need their apology," she said calmly. "I just need to know that the next girl who walks into this classroom, who doesn't look like everyone else, who wears her hair differently, who comes from a different place, won't have to be afraid of being targeted. I didn't want to go viral. I just wanted to be heard." Elijah stood in the back of the crowd that day, notebook in hand. He remembered everything, how it started, how it spiraled, how the silence broke. Later, he found Jasmine in the library, and handed her the first page he'd ever written about her. She opened it slowly, reading the words he had once struggled to say out loud. You didn't lose anything that day. They just showed who they were. And you? You showed who you could become. She smiled, not because it was over, but because she knew she wasn't alone anymore. That page ended up pinned on the wall of her bedroom. And while this chapter was closed, a new one was just beginning for every kid in that school who had ever felt ignored, underestimated, or silenced. Because Jasmine didn't just speak up for herself. She became a voice for others. Moral of the story: injustice only stays powerful when good people stay silent. But one voice, brave, clear, and real, can break through the noise and light the path for many. Never mistake someone's quiet pain for weakness. Sometimes it's the quietest ones who shake the world the loudest. And always remember this: if you have the courage to speak up, never stay quiet. Someone out there needs your voice more than you know.